So, hey, welcome to the podcast. This is about the 20th one we've done, isn't it?
21, yeah.
21. And we have no name.
A podcast without a name.
These brilliant guys have been trying to come up with a name for the podcast.
That is still a work in progress.
So it is your middle name and the street you live on?
This is what we were talking about off air, but yes.
So welcome to the James Tontai podcast. Or the what?
I'm out on
Richard Dufaside?
Morningside.
Morningside.
Jeez.
James Mulberry.
Mulberry.
Welcome to the Jonathan Cedar podcast.
Jonathan Cedar. Oh, goodness.
Actually,
Yeah.
I said mine would be James 14255 East 905.
We were actually talking about that. We were like, Jess is going to be some country road.
Yep.
So we need you to help us. All right, we need a name for this.
We have a
Wonderful
great
presentation.
gift for those,
Yeah,
whoever we decide on.
leftover T-shirts from junior high mission trips.
I was thinking like the baptism series from 2016.
There we go.
I got
That'd
some
be
of those.
valuable.
But you need to be a small. So
We have a good time. I hope you're having a good time as well. Motions. We got to jump into it because we need to cut it short today. Man, there's so many things we could do. I opened up the message just talking about the variety of emotions that I'm dealing with based upon COVID and all the political stuff that's going on in our culture, issues that I've been wrestling with my dad and his health and battle as a result of COVID, and then some personal physical things health-wise. So, man, there's just so many different directions. I was supposed to talk about envy, which used to be a real problem for me, but I feel less and less so than it used to be. I still have those moments, though, where I'm working on something, mowing my yard, and somebody rolls by in a Harley, and I'm thinking, geez, why am I doing this and he's doing that kind of thing? But that's fleeting until Matt preaches a sermon, and everybody in the country says, that's the greatest sermon ever. And I'm thinking, okay, it was okay.
could have been better.
Could have been better if but by and large, but we all have our thing. We all have our emotion that we struggle with, and maybe you really struggle with envy. But where I went with the teaching this week is really not talking about the problem, but talking about the solution. And I think the solution that is laid out for us by Paul really doesn't matter what the emotional issue is. This works. If it's anxiety, if it's fear, if it's frustrations or envy or any of the other things that we're going to talk about the next couple of weeks, this really does make a difference. Mm-hmm. So his story to the Philippians. Backstory. Let's go to Acts 16 real fast. I don't know. Can you guys put yourself in that position where because you did something good, you've been stripped, beaten, severely flogged, thrown in jail, and left until tomorrow morning's trial, which you probably know isn't going to go well? How do you feel?
Yeah. The thing about the backstory of this is like, if you can correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm sure you will. He tries to push off correcting this whole thing, right? Like he did when they has this interaction with this girl. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. Initially, they don't do anything.
They don't do anything.
They ignore her.
And I think it's because he knows it was coming, right? I mean,
It's hard to say.
yeah.
Could be just timing. He's waiting for the right moment.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as it happens, boom.
Yeah, he's in trouble.
Yep.
They put him through that whole process. That's Acts chapter 16. If you want to go back and read that backstory, and that would be valuable for people to do as well. But I can't imagine putting myself through that. I mean, a lot of the suffering we experience is because of our own problem. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not always, but this isn't. This is from doing good. And what does he do? You guys remember? Did you listen to the sermon? You haven't heard the sermon yet.
I haven't heard the sermon yet.
Acts 16:25. He's singing in prison, singing and praying. And I read that and I think, geez, I wish I could do that, but I don't think I would. Not at first, anyway.
It'd be tough. It takes an incredible perspective and reminder to like zoom out of the immediate. And I think that's important for any of these emotions that we're working through. Like, emotions are real. Everyone has them. But we tend to intensify those emotions when we're looking inward at our situation or current circumstance rather than looking outward at, the bigger picture. And I think that's the same thing is when we have a like gospel perspective. And this is hard and this is why we need one another to speak the truth into each other. And we're reminded of how good God is, how big he is, and how little even difficult situations may be. Like, we see the big perspective. We're able to take a breath, zoom out, and like have confidence in the big picture. It doesn't
don't you think we're so tuned into the here and now, particularly with social media?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That is just blasted at our face.
Yep.
Yeah. One of the things a couple weeks ago, as we did the first messages on guilt, and before I went into that, I wanted to start with laying out just a glimpse of who God is, and because I think so many people gauge their status of their relationship with Christ based on the emotions that they feel in the moment. And we see it all the time in a service that's portrayed as powerful. Then people feel an emotional response, and it's in that moment that they feel like they're closer to God, if you will. And
See,
then
that's what was happening when he was preaching here last week.
everybody was
It
closer.
wasn't that great.
It was
It was
'cause
just
it
an
was
emotional response.
Well, and so on the opposite side of that, then what happens when it's not as powerful of a service?
Yeah.
People start to feel like, well, I wasn't as close to God that day. And I mean, how many times in ministry, I know you guys have you gotten the question, where is God when I don't feel him? Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, I think I was in Costa Rica.
You already forgot?
Took some high school students there. It wasn't directed to me. I didn't struggle with that. So, no. So one of the students asked us, where is God when I don't feel him? And this was like, we're talking like I just started in ministry, so I really didn't know how to answer that question yet. And this was the time when Sean and Kim Splector were still missionaries in Costa Rica. And she kept asking this question, and Sean finally said, it is extremely dangerous to reduce God to an emotion. In fact, if you reduce God to emotions, then your view of God is way too small. And that was just something that stuck with me from the very beginning when that happened. And I think that is where we need to keep bringing people back to in this series. It's like, if you're reducing how you feel or how you view God based on what you feel in the moment, your view of God is way too small and your view of yourself is way too big.
And it goes back to what you talked about last week in the podcast, that you can't trust your emotions. Paul here is not trusting his emotions. He's not letting his emotion keep him from worshiping.
Yeah, that's a strange thing because it is emotional. Our relationship with God does contain a lot of passionate emotion, our walking close with him, but that's not it. Mm-hmm. That's a result of it. Mm-hmm. And I see that so much. People chasing experiences. People chasing moments.
Yeah.
Instead of chasing a relationship with God.
I know for me, that whole fruit to root thing, I love it, but I hate it because
is that backwards? Shouldn't it be root to fruit?
No, it's root to fruit, fruit to root. Like, you work it both ways depending on where you're at. But I love it and hate it because I do it to myself, and then I know exactly what's going on. Like with my kids, when they don't listen to me, I get angry, right? And so yes, it is the listening, but it's ultimately because I think I'm in control and I want to be in control. And so when my children do not obey what I believe to be right and necessary, then emotion springs forth out of that belief. And so I think, we start looking at these different emotions, whatever it might be, there's a rooted issue going on there. It's not my children.
Isn't that what Jesus is saying when he says, out of your heart comes words, out of your heart comes sexual immorality, out of your heart comes all these different list of actions in Matthew? The heart's the problem. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the core issue. That's where the change needs to happen, and that's why I think Paul's answer to the Philippians is so powerful. Yeah. If you'll root yourself in this, then the moment doesn't change who you are. Well, he says it's a peace that passes human understanding. And that's, in essence, that's a peace that's not based upon circumstance. Because human peace, human comfort, human stability is found in environment, in circumstance.
And when that changes, it goes to the wayside.
That's why I believe everybody feels so displaced right now, is because if you're looking to the world for stability right now, my goodness, there is none. And so, yeah, I think just staying rooted in who God is key.
At my Bible study this week at the Harley Barn, one of the guys brought up a quote. He attributed it to me. I don't remember ever saying it, but
It was probably Matt.
it wasn't Matt. I liked it, so I'll take credit.
Rick Warren.
I'll take credit for it. But he said, we're supposed to, we spend too much time looking left and right and not enough time looking up. And I think that's so right. So I'll take credit for it.
That was totally me.
I'll take credit for that.
I don't think I've ever heard you say that, but okay.
You wouldn't remember if I did, though. But isn't that accurate? We look at the problem, or we look for solutions. When at the very least, first we should look up. That's Philippians 4. Pray. In any and every situation, pray. Present your petitions, your requests to God with thanksgiving. Pray. Let's look up. You know, the God who is near, he says, will provide for you peace. That's all built out of that relationship that he has developed with Jesus. So it's not circumstantial.
And it's not conditional on, like, I was thinking, even with other people, some people, we're talking about envy, right? So whether it's someone's getting praise or has something, when we can get to a point of understanding how good God is, we can celebrate with the people the good attributes, either, if they've done a good job or they have something. We can truly be happy for them and celebrate that with them, because it's not about me versus them or me compared to them. It's, look what God has done for me, and like, I'm rooted in that. And so, praise God, you have a new Harley, or whatever. So
that's tough when it's something you want.
Yeah.
But if you can celebrate it with them, then you've got your roots in the right place.
Mm-hmm. That's the key.
I think it's interesting that he writes a book about contentment from jail. Like, we don't know where he is, but we know that he's writing to these people about being content.
You can blow that story up with context, too, and make it even a stronger application today. Because most of us don't go through that kind of experience.
Yeah.
But in jail to who? The Romans, right? You talk about a corrupt governmental system, a system based upon all the wrong things, power and pleasure. You talk about a system that, what was it? They say 25% of the population were slaves.
Mm-hmm.
So
he is a Roman citizen.
Yeah, injustices everywhere, fear. There's, and then we look at our government, and a lot of people are whacked out today because of what's going on governmentally, politically. And it is an area for prayer and concern, but my lands, it should not control our emotions, because it's something external.
Mm-hmm.
But it does.
It does.
That's because so many people are spending so much time just looking at that.
Well, and the reason they're looking at that is because, I don't know if you're planning to allude to this, but you talked about that documentary that you...
Social Dilemma on Netflix.
Yeah. You talked about being targeted. And I think that's part of the reason why that social media stuff that we've talked about drags you down, is because they target you with it.
Yeah. So you get the impression that everybody who's sane in the world thinks just exactly like you do, because all of the information that you receive is that slant.
Well, yeah, you only connect with people who are like you. And what do you do when someone doesn't like you or doesn't think like you? I delete them. I'm just saying. It's just true.
Yeah.
So it's in front of you all the time.
Well, and it's created this idea of, in our country, in the church, we're not unified. It has created now pockets of tribalism. Mm-hmm. You're just surrounding yourself with people who agree with you on everything. And so your pockets are pretty small, but there's just all of these different arguments, and we could share one belief on one thing and disagree on another, and all of a sudden we're in two different tribes, and it's
and
just
I don't
so
think
divisive.
people realize they're being fed that.
I don't think so
To
either.
control. This documentary says that, and it's analytics on you, what you click on, what you view, the whole thing. They know you well.
Yep.
And so they feed you what you are interested in because you're for sale.
Yeah.
It's the essence of it.
Absolutely.
Yep.
There are people out there buying you and your interest, ultimately your money.
Trying to get you to buy something.
Yeah. And it's all, and we think, well, that couldn't be about politics, or it is. It's totally. That whole, everything is being fed at us. That's why this is so important. He talks about this, the heart change and the mind, they're connected. It's not just about feeling change, it's the mind, the thought process. Romans 12, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. If you're going to be a good living sacrifice, you got to have a mind change. Paul says it here in Philippians 4, verse 8. He says he's learned to be content. That's a mental process. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, or praiseworthy, think about such things. So there is a transformation of his mind, his thought process, so that there is stability when the storm strikes. And I think we're lacking that. Mm-hmm. If we're filling ourselves with scroll, that's pretty shaky.
Yeah.
Well, and then Paul goes on to say there, like, if you've learned those, put them into practice. And I think that's another area of lacking, like in our culture. We're a culture of consumption, but not really application as far as God's truth. How many people want to come to a good Bible study and, they come, spend an hour, but then like their lives really aren't any different than anyone else's the rest of the week. Yeah. When in reality, if we are going to have a mind change, it's a total transformation of who we are, our purpose, our mission, our values. That's where like our focus begins to shift and our lives really begin to change. It's not at 1 hour a week on a Sunday morning or in a small group. Those are just little catalysts for change.
Well, and if we're going to narrow that down even more, then 1 hour of our week should not be driving the other 167 hours. It should be the way we're living our life in those 167 hours should drive how we worship during that hour. Mm-hmm. And so many times people are looking at this church service, this 1 hour to fill them up emotionally and carry them through the rest of the week. And they're surprised when it doesn't. And it leads to you start thinking, well, where am I at with my relationship with God?
Mm-hmm. So do you still have screen time on your phone to tell you how much time you're spending?
I do, yeah.
I hate that.
Yep.
You guys have that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I figured it up when, I think I've said this before, but I figured it up a few months ago, and I had been on my phone. My daughter turned 5. I had been on my phone a year of her life. It was a quarter of all my kids' lives. I had been.
And that's just
on my
phone.
That's just phone. Yeah.
There's all kinds of other places where that's coming.
Yep.
So how many days of her life had been in the Word?
Probably not that much.
Yeah. Well, I'm not.
Yeah, I mean
that's all of us.
It's just the reality.
Mm-hmm. That's all of us.
And, when you and I talked about this, but it's what you put in eventually comes out.
Yep.
And you spend enough time with someone, whether it be a life group or whether it be at a meal, like eventually you'll see what's in their heart by what they do and what they say. Yeah.
If you want to carry this out in a application, go put $1 in your gas tank and see how far you can go on that $1. Can you go the entire week with $1 gas? Like, ain't gonna happen.
Right.
Call Ben.
It used
Run out of
to.
gas.
Ben would love to come pick you up and give you a ride.
When I had that scooter, it worked, but
And then it broke.
lots to think about. I know it's just been a short podcast today, but I think there's plenty here for you to chew on, and that's what we really do this for life transformation. So dig in.